What we're going to talk about is how to get started quickly with the cookie cutter spatial data science template. We're operating under the assumption that you already have most of the requirements, specifically ArcGIS Pro. So what we can do is we can look at how you access this. First of all of this is available in a repository in GitHub. It's underneath Esri and then Cookie Cutter Spatial Data Science. Now, once you're on the homepage for the repository, all the docs that we're going to talk about and you can use for reference are available over here on the right side. So you can see this details everything you need to do to be able to use the Cookie Cutter Spatial Data Science template. In fact, we even have a getting started page. Now, what you'll need to have is ArcGIS Pro installed, but then you also need a few other things. You'll also need Conda, which comes with ArcGIS Pro, so your life's easy in that case. You'll also need to have Cookie Cutter, and that's what we're going to talk about installing right now. Before you do that, you also need to make sure that you have Git installed. That allows your projects to be under version control. And also, if you want to have your projects automatically set up on GitHub, you need to install the GitHub command line interface as well. Right here from the documentation, before you go farther in the video, if you don't have these links on these respective headings will take you to the Git as well as the GitHub command line interface install pages. So you can go ahead and get these installed and configured and then come back and continue. So once you get that all set up, then finally we can talk about how we set this up with ArcGIS Pro. What I've done is I've organized all the commands in here so that you can copy and paste your way through to getting set up. When you run these commands, make sure that you invoke them from the ArcGIS Python command prompt. If you open up a normal command window, you're not going to have Conda available unless you've configured it already on your machine separately. This isn't always that common if all you do is use ArcGIS Pro. So in that case, let's make sure that you invoke this by going to your programs, ArcGIS, the Python command prompt. Now, once we have this open, this is going to give us access to a Conda environment that's installed with ArcGIS Pro. We don't want to use the default environment. We want to leave that untouched, but we're going to clone it and then add Cookie Cutter to it so that we have ArcPy, which is the Python package that ships with ArcGIS Pro and allows us to access all of those capabilities, but we also need to have Cookie Cutter installed in the same environment for all this to work. So this is part of the setup. Once you have this prompt open, you can go to the help documentation and copy the first command. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a new Python and Conda environment called CK, and I did this a few minutes earlier, but I'm going to go ahead and do it again to show you how this works. It's going to create this new environment called CK. This CK environment, I gave it a short name, and the reason is when you're activating the environment, you're going to be typing this in. It's a whole lot easier if it's a short name. So now it's going to go ahead and copy everything into this new environment. So now we have a brand new Conda environment that's an exact clone of the environment that has ArcGIS Pro in it. Identical. So what we need to do next is we need to activate it. Just to stay consistent, I'll go ahead and copy this. And so now what happens is the CK environment is now active. We can see that because in the front of the command prompt, notice how in parentheses it shows us what our current Conda environment is. It's now CK. So what we can do is continuing in the help documentation, we can see the next command is the one we need to copy, and that is the one that is going to install Cookie Cutter into our environment. And what it's doing is it's going to the internet, it's going to download this, and it's going to install this Cookie Cutter Python package. So it's going to give us a little bit more functionality. In this case, the great functionality to be able to use templates to be able to get started with projects quickly. So from here, now that Cookie Cutter is installed and we've got that in there in our new environment, we have all the setup done. So what I'm going to do is close out of most of these resources. I'm going to leave the help up. But what I want to emphasize is right now, we've done all the setup. Everything from here forward, we're talking about using the Cookie Cutter template to start new projects. So from here forward, these are the steps you're going to do when you want to start a new project. So what we can do is this same process again. We're going to open up our command prompt by going to ArcGIS Python command prompt. And in here, you notice, remember, the ArcGIS Pro Pi 3 environment is the one that's active at the beginning. We want our cookie cutter environment. So what we're going to do is activate CK. So now we have the cookie cutter environment. Again, we can tell that because in prepending our command prompt is the CK in parentheses. That tells us what environment is activated. The next thing we want to do, wherever we run the cookie cutter template at, it's going to create the project in that directory. We don't want to be putting new projects inside of this location where the cookie cutter environment is at. Rather, we want to go to where we save our projects. You can move around in the directory tree in the command prompt using the cd command. And I don't want to go to program files, rather I want to go to C projects, which is a folder that I've created in the root of my directory so that I can save everything in the same place. This tends to vary where I put it. Sometimes I put it in my user profile, but on this machine, it's right in the root of the C drive. From here, what we can do is we can either type it in manually or we can, again, just copy and paste the command. This command, cookie cutter, and then Cookiecutter-Spatial-Data-Science, this is just referencing the GitHub URL where this template is located at. So now you notice that I said I wanted to download it because guess what? I've used this quite a few times. I want to have the most current version. And now I'm going to give it the name of the project that I want to name it. You want to make this name something that likely doesn't have spaces or any special characters. The reason is this is going to be the name of the folder, as well as if you tell it to create a GitHub repo, this is going to be the name that's used for both of those. Now the next one, the project title, we can give this anything we want to, any name we want to. And this can be mixed case, it can be special characters, it can have spaces, this doesn't really matter. Then you want to, however you want to tell people that this is who did it. A lot of times I actually include my GitHub. I hyperlink, and then we tell people what this is. Make this short because it's used in quite a few places. In fact, it'll also be included in the description for the GitHub repo, but you can give it something that is sentence structure, so it can be a few more words with spaces. The support library, this is going to be the directory and the name of the Python package that is created as part of your project. Notice in this case, it uses an underscore instead of a dash, and this is built from whatever you gave the project name. You can change this to something else if you want to. I tend to usually leave this fairly close to what is suggested. The WebGIS, this is the URL for ArcGIS Online or the ArcGIS Enterprise deployment. So whatever you use to store data. If you're not planning on using this, you can just leave it as is. It won't be used. But this is something you can use if you want to. We also have the WebGIS profile. This is used if you're using the ArcGIS Python API. On the authentication documentation page, it discusses how this is used fairly well. So I'm not going to go over it here. What this allows you to do, though, is it allows you to use a profile on the machine, and this profile then uses credential management as part of the machine you're on. And this allows you to keep your credentials out of version control and out of your scripts so that way you don't run the risk of accidentally exposing your credentials. So we're just implementing a best practice here. Next, you choose your open source license. Most of my stuff I tend to put under Apache 2, but if you don't want to use one, you can just say 4 or leave it as the default, which is obviously what I tend to do. Finally, you have the option of whether or not you're going to create a GitHub repository along with your project. In this case, I'm going to leave it as a default of 1 so that you can see how this works. So now I'm going to let it run. It's going to create my entire project with all the properties that we've just entered. And it's also going to initialize the Git repository in this location and then create the repository on GitHub. Now it's pushing everything up to that repository. And if we want to take a look at this repository, we can go to this URL and notice that now we have a brand new repository created. And in fact, if I go ahead and sign in, there's something else I can show you too that's really useful about this. Go ahead and sign in. Now underneath settings, what we can do is underneath pages, we can say we want to enable GitHub Actions. And then you'll notice that right here where it says initial commit, right next to it, it says pending. What's going on is it's making the documentation using mkdocs. And once that's created, what it will do is it will actually make it available to us. So if we configure the project to use the GitHub Pages website, what you'll have is just like my project where it's available at the hyperlink. If I go to this location, this documentation was built from the default documentation docs. And if you look in it, the example Python API is documented. That's included. All of this is built from the templated Python package that comes with this project. And then also there's a little bit of reference in here. So this talks about a few things about building the documentation, how it's laid out, if you want to include notebooks, some of the make commands that are available in here, and some of the cliff notes. So automatically now we have a project built, we have a GitHub repo that goes along with it, and everything's under version control. So very quickly, we have a project up and running with documentation. Now, if the next thing we may want to do is we get into our new SICK project, and we can create a Python environment from that. But the first thing we want to look at is the packages that are included with it. So in this case, we can look at this in VS Code. So there's a file included called the environment.yml file. There's a lot of packages included in here by default. Most of these that are under MK that say mkdocs, you'll probably want to leave in here because these are the ones that are used to build the make make docs if you're wanting to build the documentation and look at it locally. A lot of these others are just common packages that I find useful. But if you want to prune this a little bit to, for instance, you're not planning on synchronizing anything with AWS or Azure, you can take those out without much problem. For instance, TQDM, this is useful for if you want to have progress indicators. But a few of these, maybe you don't need a lot of these extra packages. You can trim down this payload pretty quickly. And let's say you don't want Dask, we don't necessarily want cookie cutter, we can leave black in for code formatting. So we can trim this down pretty quick to where it's not going to be as complicated of a installation once we get everything configured. So we've got that all built. Now if we want to, what we can say is we want to make env. What this does is it clones the ArcGIS Pro Pi 3 environment, just like we did earlier. And once it's cloned that environment, it also installs all of our packages that are listed in the environment file, along with installing our local Python package that we can develop in experimental mode. That means any changes you make to your environment are automatically reflected when you try to use it. So this just speeds up your development cycle a lot because everything's organized. The other thing is when it clones this environment we can see shows up as a folder. This is where it's building the environment right now inside of our project directory. This is really useful because you can use the environment, you can customize this environment, you can test using this environment, but if you decide, I don't want any of this stuff on my machine anymore, as soon as you delete the project that you're working on from your machine, the Conda environment along with all the other files are gone. So it allows you to clean things up very quickly when you're done with this project on your machine or if you need to archive it. One of the other things is the gitignore file is already configured such that the env directory, along with your data directory where you store data, is not going to be synchronized with version control with GitHub. So these things, it makes sure that we don't have too many things synchronizing with ArcGIS Online. So this makes your life a little bit easier. So we can go back and check. It's still working on and creating our environment. Notice how it's already cloned the ArcGIS Pro Pi 3 environment. What it's doing now is it is installing all of our additional packages for our project. So from here, what has happened? Just reviewing, we cloned our ArcGIS Pro Pi 3 environment. We installed a number of other additional dependencies that we can use for working with our project. And finally, we installed our local Python package, sick_project, that allows us to work on our project in this environment. To activate this environment, to do more with it, we would need to say, let me see, activat, activate, and then we can specify a path in this case. So I just do a /env. What this does is it activates that path. So now we're working with the project that is in, or excuse me, with the environment that is included inside of our project. So what this allows us to do is if we do anything in here, if we need to add or remove packages, we need to experiment, we're always using this environment. Now, if we want to, we can even do things like start up Jupyter, because Jupyter Lab is included with ArcGIS Pro Pi 3. In fact, I even listed in the dependencies as well in the environment file. And what this does is now we're actually running Jupyter Lab. So we can go in and we can start working with our notebook template. Something else you'll notice about this is I've stubbed out a few things when I'm trying to get started quickly in a project. A lot of times it helps me to have all of these data paths along with how we can load the configs so that we can get things very quickly and be able to start using our project. And if you want to use this, you can obviously get rid of anything you don't need. So that's how you can get started with Jupyter very quickly. One of the other things you have available is inside this project is the ArcGIS folder. Now, this is where you're going to find most of the things that are related to ArcGIS. And if we go ahead and look at this in the File Explorer, you can see that inside of this ArcGIS folder, you have things like your PYT toolbox if you want to customize that, but also the APRX, the Pro project file. So if we open this up, this is convenient because now we have is a Pro project that is configured to work with this directory structure. Opening this up, one of the nicest things is inside of here, we have a number of directories already mapped, along with a default database set up to the interim geodatabase file geodatabase, along with external processed and raw data file geodatabases. These correspond to the data directories, raw, interim, processed, and external. The reason why it's set up this way instead of the normal way that Pro works, where it has a named file geodatabase that matches the project, is because of the way that the Cookiecutter-Data-Science, which is the template that we base this off of, uses the best practice of analysis as a DAG. Analysis is a directed acyclic graph. That means that I get data in, and then I create scripts and automated processes that take that data from its raw state and make it into something that I want to output. And so the idea is that data will land in the raw directory just like I get it. I don't change it at all. What I do is I build different scripts, different models, different things that I can easily make run. And any intermediate data sets that are created along the way, those go in interim. And any data that I may need to use as part of my analysis, I pull from external. A lot of times, think about this. If we get data in and we need to do an overlay, we need to figure out what state or what county the points that we may receive is in. We will do the spatial overlay with the data with those polygons, and we will have those polygons in our external directory. But the raw points that come in, they will land in raw. We'll use data from external, potentially put those in interim, and then any other processing steps we need to do, it'll finally land in processed. This is the idea of analysis as a DAG, a directed acyclic graph. Data comes in, and we build the process such that it creates our output that is then used. There's also a couple of other things in here. If you need to have any output figures, I put that in there that is easily mapped so that if you're creating maps and outputs that can be saved, that's then put in there. And then also so, so that you can use notebooks easily within ArcGIS Pro, if you like doing that. I have the notebook directory mapped in here for your project. The other thing to take note of is inside the ArcGIS directory, there's a PYT toolbox already configured so that we can open that up and we can see the example Python toolbox. Apparently there's an error in it. I was messing with it this morning. But that PYT toolbox is already configured and ready for you to work on and use to integrate with your project. So this is just a high-level overview, and you can dig into it a lot more. There's a lot more details in here that you can look at. But ultimately, this was just a high-level overview of how you can get started quickly, get your machine configured, and start doing analysis very quickly using the cookie cutter spatial data science template.